A single word can change everything. When this Ronin refused a direct order from the Daimyo, he believed the punishment would fall on him alone. He was wrong. That same night, an entire village was surrounded, judged, and condemned for his choice. Before the story begins, comment the name of the city where this takes place. And if you want more Dark Samurai tales about honor, power, and impossible decisions, subscribe to the channel. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Takeshi arrived at the gates of Kaneza. His sandals were worn through at the heel, his akama stained with mud from the mountain pass, and the weight of his katana felt heavier than it had in years. He was not looking for work. He was looking for somewhere to disappear. A Ronin without a master is a man without a shadow, his father used to say, and Takeshi had been walking in full sunlight for far too long. The village of Mizuhara sat in a valley, just beyond Kanazawa's outer territories, a place where rice farmers worked land that barely fed their families and where the name of Daimyo Matsuja was spoken with the same reverence reserved for thunder. Takeshi had heard stories about Matsuja during his travels, a man who ruled not with wisdom but with certainty, a lord who believed that mercy was weakness and that a single act of disobedience could rot an entire domain from within. Takeshi had no intention of meeting him. He planned to pass through Mizuhara, rest for a night, and continued north, where the mountains swallowed men, holding questions were never asked. But the world has a way of placing obstacles in the path of those who seek to avoid them. On his second night in the village, while Takeshi sat outside a modus sipping weak tea, a procession of samurai rode through the narrow dirt road. Their armor gleamed despite the rain. Their horses moved with disciplined precision, and at the center of the formation rode a man whose presence seemed to darken the air around him. Even without being told, Takeshi knew this was The Daimyo did not look at the villagers who bowed low as he passed. He did not acknowledge the inn, or the farmers, or the children who scattered like His eyes were fixed ahead, as if the world behind him had already been judged and found insufficient. The procession stopped. One of the samurai dismounted and walked directly toward Takeshi. The man was older, his face marked by scars that told stories Takeshi did not want to hear. He stopped 3 paces away and studied Takeshi with the kind of gaze that assessed worth in seconds. "You are a swordsman," the samurai said. It was not a question. Takeshi did not respond. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, until the villagers who had been watching began to whisper, until even the rain seemed to hesitate. The samurai spoke again. "Lord Matsuja requires men of skill for a task. You will present yourself at dawn." Then he turned and walked back to his horse without waiting for an answer. Takeshi felt the weight of every eye in the village. He finished his tea slowly, stood, and walked back into the inn without a word. Inside his small room, he sat in the darkness and listened to the rain hammer against the roof. He had been summoned. To refuse would be an insult. To accept would be to place himself under the command of a man whose reputation was built on the bones of those who had displeased him. Takeshi closed his eyes and remembered why he had become a Ronin in the first place. He had served a lord once. He had followed orders. He had watched good men die for bad reasons. And when he could no longer reconcile the sword in his hand with the voice of his conscience, he had walked away. His master had let him go, which was a mercy. Matsuja would not be so kind. Dawn came with pale light that barely penetrated the clouds. Takeshi did not go to the castle. He packed his few belongings, paid the innkeeper, and prepared to leave through the western road. But as he stepped outside, he found the entrance blocked. The scarred samurai stood there with 4 others, their hands resting casually on their sword hilts. "You were summoned," the man said. Takeshi met his gaze. "I am a Ronin. I serve no lord." The samurai's expression did not change. "That is why you were summoned. Lord Matsuda does not tolerate refusal. You will call me..." Takeshi felt the old anger rising in his chest, the same anger that had cost him everything once before. He knew what would happen if he drew his sword. He knew these men were skilled. He knew the village would burn for harboring him, and yet the word formed in his mouth with the inevitability of rain. "No." The samurai's eyes widened slightly, the only sign of surprise. Then his face hardened. "You understand what you have done?" Takeshi nodded, slowly. "I do." The scarred samurai looked at him for a long moment, then turned to his men. "Return to the castle. Inform Lord Matsuda that the Ronin has refused." Then he looked back at Takeshi. "You should have kept walking. Now it is too late for everyone." The samurai mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Takeshi standing in the mud with the weight of his choice settling over him like a funeral shroud. The villagers emerged slowly. An old woman who sold vegetables at the market approached first. "What have you done?" she whispered. Takeshi had no answer. A farmer with calloused hands and fear in his eyes came next. "You refused the daimyo. They will come for you." Takeshi knew this. He had always known this, but what he had not expected was the innkeeper, a thin man named Hideo, stepping forward with tears streaming down his face. "You have killed us all," he said, his voice breaking. "When a man refuses a daimyo, the Lord does not punish only the man. He punishes everyone who sheltered him, everyone who fed him, everyone who stood near him and did not cut him down." Takeshi felt the cold spreading through his chest. Matsuja would not simply send soldiers to kill him. He would make an example. He would show every village in his domain what happened when a single person defied his will. By midday, the news had spread. Families began packing what little they owned, preparing to flee into the mountains. But where could they go? Matsudra's domain stretched 4 days in every direction. His samurai patrolled every road. His magistrates controlled every town. There was nowhere to run that his reach could not find them. An old man named Jiro, who had fought in wars decades ago, gathered a group of farmers and approached Takeshi. "We have no weapons," he said. "We have no training, but if you teach us, we can fight." Takeshi looked at the faces around him, farmers who had never held a sword, men whose hands knew only the plow and the harvest, women whose strength came from carrying water, and children. These were not warriors. These were people whose crime was existing in the same place as him at the wrong moment in history. He could leave. He could walk into the forest and disappear. Perhaps Matsuja would be satisfied with burning the village and would not pursue him. Perhaps the daimyo would accept collective punishment as sufficient, and Takeshi could live with the knowledge that his choice had killed 50 innocent people. Or he could stay. He could face whatever came. He could try to turn farmers into fighters in the few hours they had left. Both choices felt like drowning. Takeshi made his decision. "We do not fight," he said. Jiro's face twisted with anger. "Then what? We wait to die?" Takeshi shook his head. "We prepare, we fortify, we make them work for every life they take, and when they come, I will meet them first, alone. Perhaps if I fall quickly, they will be satisfied." The farmers looked at each other. No one believed him. No one believed Matsudra would stop at one death. The afternoon passed in frantic preparation. Men dug trenches at the village entrance. Women sharpened farming tools into crude weapons. Children were sent into the forest to hide in caves their grandparents had used during the last war. Takeshi moved through the village like a ghost, offering advice, correcting mistakes, knowing that none of it would matter. He had seen armies. He knew what disciplined samurai could do to untrained farmers. This was not preparation for battle. This was preparation for slaughter. And it was his fault. Every trench dug, every sharpened blade, every frightened face was his responsibility. He had chosen his pride over their safety. He had valued his freedom over their lives. And now they would all pay. As the sun began to set, a young woman named Yuki approached him. She carried her infant son wrapped against her chest. Her husband had been one of the first to start digging trenches. Her eyes were dry, but her voice shook. "Why did you refuse?" she asked. Takeshi had been asking himself the same question. "Because I have refused before," he said finally. "Because I spent years following orders that destroyed my soul. Because I swore I would never again let another man's will replace my own. Even if it costs lives. Even if it costs yours." He looked at the child in her arms, so small and unaware of the darkness coming. "I did not think it would cost yours," he said quietly. "I believed the punishment would be mine alone. I was wrong." Yuki stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his arm. "You are not wrong to refuse," she said. "You were wrong to think you could refuse without consequence. We are all bound together. Your choices are our choices. Your fate is our fate. That is what it means to live in this world." Night fell like a curtain. Torches were lit around the village perimeter. Men stood at their posts with farming tools gripped in white-knuckled hands. Women gathered the youngest children in the largest building, a storage house with thick walls and a single reinforced door. Takeshi stood at the main entrance to the village, his hand on his sword, his eyes fixed on the road that led back to The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with moisture, with the smell of wet earth and fear. He had fought in darkness before. He had killed men whose faces he never saw. But this was different. This was waiting for an execution he had ordered himself. The sound came first. Hoofbeats, many of them, moving with the steady rhythm of trained cavalry. Then torches appeared on the road, the zanzavam transforming night into flickering orange day. The samurai came in formation, their armor dark and their weapons ready. At the front rode the scarred samurai who had first summoned Tuki. Behind him came at least 40 warriors, and behind them, on a horse adorned with silk and gold, rode Daimyo Matsudra himself. He had come personally. This was not simply punishment. This was theater. This was a lesson being written in blood for every village in the domain to remember. The formation stopped 50 paces from the village entrance. The scarred samurai dismounted and walked forward alone. His voice carried across the distance with practiced authority. Ronin, you refused a direct order from Lord Mat. This is an offense that cannot stand. Step forward and accept your death with honor. Perhaps your sacrifice will satisfy our Lord's justice. Takeshi took 3 steps forward. He felt the eyes of the villagers on his back. He felt the weight of every life that hung in the balance. But he also felt something else. The old clarity that came before battle. The calm that settled over him when choices became simple. He had made his decision when he refused the summons. Now he would see it through. I will not kneel, he said. If your lord wants my head, he will take it with a sword. The scarred samurai sighed. You make this harder than it needs to be. Larji Matsudaira, he called back over his shoulder. The Ronin refuses, even in the face of death. What is your command? Matsudra rode forward, slowly. Huenji spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. The refusal of one is the permission of all. This village sheltered him, fed him, allowed him to rest beneath their roofs. They are complicit in his defiance, therefore they share his punishment. Burn it. Kill everyone. Leave no one to carry the story except the story itself. Let every farmer in my domain know that proximity to defiance is defiance itself. The words hung in the air like smoke. Takeshi felt his heart stop. The farmers behind him gasped. Someone screamed. Matsudra had not come to punish him. He had come to erase an entire community, to transform 50 lives into a warning that would echo across generations. This was not justice. This was not even revenge. This was power demonstrating its own existence. Takeshi drew his sword. The steel sang in the darkness. Wait, he called out. I am the one who refused. Let me fight. If I win, you leave. If I lose, you take my head and spare the village. The scarred samurai laughed without humor. You think this is about you. You think your death satisfies anything? This is about a daimyo who cannot allow refusal to exist. Your death is guaranteed. The question is, how many die with you? Behind Takeshi, old Jiro stepped forward. He held a sharpened farming sickle. I will fight, he said. Then Hideo the innkeeper. Then the young woman, Yuki's husband. Then a dozen others. Men who knew they would die, but who could not simply wait for slaughter. Takeshi wanted to tell them to stop, wanted to tell them that fighting would only make it worse. But he knew that was a lie. It was already as bad as it could be. Fighting at least gave him the dignity of resistance, of choosing how their story ended. He turned back to face the samurai. You want to make an example, Meiki? Iravi? Let me face your best warriors. Let me die in combat. Then your lord can tell the story of the Ronin who refused and was cut down by the finest swordsman in the domain. That is a better story than burning farmers in their homes. Matsudra leaned forward on his horse. The torchlight caught his face, revealing features that looked carved from stone. You presume to negotiate, he said. You presume that your death holds value? It does not, but I will grant you this. You may fight. You may face my samurai one by one until you fall. And for every one of my men you kill, I will spare 1 family from this village. 10 families, perhaps 15. The rest will burn. This is my mercy. This is the only negotiation your defiance has earned. Takeshi felt the trap closing. If he refused to fight, everyone died. If he fought and lost quickly, everyone died. But if he fought well, if he killed enough samurai, some might survive. It was not a choice. It was a different kind of execution. But it was all he had. He nodded slowly. "Send your first man." The scarred samurai stepped forward. "I will be first," he said. "You should have accepted the summons, Ronin. You should have bowed. Now, we both do what we must." He drew his sword, a beautiful blade that gleamed even in torchlight. Takeshi took his stance, feeling the familiar weight of his katana, the balance he had known for 20 years. The two men circled each other slowly. Behind them, the village watched. Behind them, 40 samurai waited for their turn. Behind them, Matsuda sat on his horse like a judge watching an execution he had already written. The scarred samurai attacked first. His strike was fast, professional, aimed at Takeshi's throat. Takeshi deflected and countered, his blade moving in the patterns his first teacher had drilled into him before he could walk properly. The samurai was good, his footwork was precise. His strikes came from unexpected angles. But Takeshi had fought men like this before. Men who followed forms. Men who trusted their training. He fought like someone who had nothing left to lose because that was exactly what he was. Their blades met 7 times. On the 8th exchange, Takeshi saw the opening, a slight overextension, a moment where the samurai's weight shifted wrong. He moved without thinking, his sword cutting through the gap in the armor at the shoulder, severing muscle and bone. The scarred samurai fell to his knees, his sword dropping from nerveless fingers. He looked up at Takeshi with something like respect. "You fight well," he said, "but it will not be enough." Then he fell forward into the mud and did not move again. Takeshi turned to face Matsuda. "One family," he said. The Daimyo nodded slowly. "One family may leave. Choose quickly." The choice was impossible. How do you select which lives matter more? Takeshi looked back at the villagers. "Yuki," he said, "the woman with the infant. Let her leave with her husband and child." There was a moment of silence. Then Yuki stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I will not go," she said. "I will not leave while others die." Her husband grabbed her arm. "We must go for him." She looked at her son, at her husband, at the village she had known her entire life. Then she nodded. The 3 of them walked slowly toward the forest. No one stopped them. No one said goodbye. They simply disappeared into the darkness like ghosts released from a binding. The second samurai stepped forward. He was younger than the first, his armor newer, his face unmarked by scars. He did not speak. He simply attacked. This one was faster. His strikes came like rain, relentless and overwhelming. Takeshi defended, his arms already beginning to tire, his breath coming harder. The young samurai fought with the confidence of someone who had never lost. But confidence creates patterns, and patterns create predictability. When the samurai overcommitted to a high strike, Takeshi dropped low and cut across the man's leg. The samurai fell, crying out in pain. Takeshi finished him with a thrust through the throat. Quick, as merciful as this night allowed. "2 families," he called out. Matsuda nodded. "Choose." This time Takeshi pointed to Oljiro and his wife, and Hideo the innkeeper and his mother. For people, they hesitated. "Go," Takeshi said. "Tell the story." Someone must tell the story. They left slowly, their faces marked with guilt and grief and relief they did not want to feel. The 3rd samurai was older. He moved with economy, wasting no motion. Their fight lasted longer. Takeshi felt his muscles burning, felt the wounds accumulating. Small cuts that would have meant nothing alone, but together were beginning to drain his strength. He killed the 3rd samurai with a feint that left him open to a counterstrike he barely avoided. 3 families, then the 4th samurai, a man who fought with 2 swords, who moved like water, who nearly ended Takeshi twice before a desperate combination left him bleeding out in the mud. For families, then the 5th, the 6th, the 7th. Each fight was harder. Each victory cost more. Takeshi lost count of the cuts on his arms, the bruises on his ribs, the pain that was becoming a constant companion. But he kept fighting because every samurai that fell was another family that walked into the forest. Because the alternative was watching them all burn. By the time the 10th samurai fell, Takeshi could barely stand. His sword felt like it weighed as much as a mountain. His vision was blurring at the edges. Blood ran down his arms and dripped from his fingers. He had saved 10 families, 30 or 40 people out of more than 100. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was all his body could give. He looked up at Matsuda. The Daimyo had not moved from his horse, had not shown any reaction to watching 10 of his samurai die. His face was as expressionless as when he arrived. 10 families, Matsuda said. You have fought well, Ronin, better than I expected. But now you can barely lift your sword. The next man will kill you, and then we will proceed with the burning. You have bought some mercy with your blood, but mercy has limits. Send the rest, Takeshi said, his voice rough. I will fight until I cannot stand. Then I will fight on my knees. The 11th samurai stepped forward. This one was different. He moved with the calm certainty of a master. His sword was longer than the others, its edge reflecting torchlight like captured starlight. He did not attack immediately. He stood 3 paces away and studied Takeshi with eyes that had seen too many battles to count. You are already dead, the samurai said quietly. Your spirit keeps your body standing, but the flesh has failed. There is no shame in kneeling now. Takeshi shook his head. I will not kneel. Not before him. Not before anyone. The samurai nodded slowly. Then we end this with honor. He attacked. Takeshi barely saw the strike coming. His body moved on instinct, deflecting by memory rather than sight. The samurai's blade cut through his shoulder, pain exploding through his arm. Takeshi countered, his sword moving too slow, too weak. The samurai avoided it easily and struck again, this time cutting deep into Takeshi's side. Takeshi fell to one knee, then the other. His sword point touched the ground. The world was spinning. He could hear the villagers crying, could hear Matsuda giving orders to prepare the torches, could hear the samurai stepping closer to deliver the final strike. He thought of his father, his first master, the reason he had become a Ronin, the choice that had brought him to this place. And he thought that perhaps this was always how it would end, that refusing to bend had always meant breaking completely. The samurai raised his sword. Takeshi closed his eyes. Then he heard a voice. Wait. It came from the village. Takeshi opened his eyes and saw a boy running forward. He could not have been more than 12 years old, skinny and dirty and terrified, but he ran straight toward the samurai with a farming knife in his shaking hand. The samurai looked confused. Matsuda's expression finally changed, showing something like interest. The boy reached the samurai and slashed wildly. The blade did not even come close. The samurai could have killed him with a single strike. Instead, he stepped back. Boy, the samurai said, return to your home. This does not concern you. The boy was crying now, tears streaming down his face. He is not your enemy, the boy shouted. He refused because your lord is cruel. He refused because someone had to refuse, and now you will kill us all because one man said no? That is not honor. That is not justice. That is just murder. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. The boy's words hung in the air like an accusation that could not be withdrawn. Matsuda dismounted from his horse slowly. He walked forward until he stood directly in front of the boy. The child was shaking so hard his knife rattled. But he did not run. He stood his ground and stared up at the Daimyo with defiance and terror in equal measure. What is your name? Matsuda asked quietly. The boy swallowed. Kenji! Matsuda nodded slowly. Kenji, you have said what many think, but none dare speak. You have called me cruel. You have called this murder, and you have done so knowing the consequence. That requires courage. Foolish courage, suicidal courage. But courage, nonetheless. He reached out and took the knife from Kenji's hand. The boy flinched, but did not run. Matsuda examined the blade, then looked back at the child. Your words have moved me, Kenji. Not because they are true, but because they remind me that strength must sometimes show mercy to demonstrate that it can. The Ronin has bought 10 families with his blood. You have bought the rest with your words. I will spare this village. But there must still be a price. The boy nodded, his face pale. Kill me then. If it saves them, kill me. Matsuda smiled. It was not a kind smile. I will not kill you, Kenji. You will live, you will grow. You will remember this night, and you will tell the story of what happens when someone refuses a deal. You will tell it to your children and your children's children. That is your burden. That is your price. He turned to face his remaining samurai. We leave. Now, the warriors looked at each other in confusion. One stepped forward. My lord, we came to punish this village, to make an example. Matsudra's voice cut like a blade. The example is made. They will remember that defiance costs blood, that mercy exists only at my discretion, that their lives are mine to spare or take as I see fit. And they will tell the story across the domain, a story that shows both my power and my judgment, that is worth more than ashes. He mounted his horse and looked down at Takeshi, who still knelt in the mud, barely conscious. You are a fool, Ronin. You chose pride over wisdom. You chose death over service. But you fought well. You saved lives with your sword. That is worth something. Leave this domain. If I see you again, no child's courage will spare you. The samurai formed up and rode away. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly until only silence remained. Then the villagers erupted. They rushed forward, surrounding Takeshi, supporting him, pulling him to his feet. Hands pressed cloth against his wounds. Voices spoke words he could not hear through the ringing in his ears. Kenji stood nearby, still shaking, still crying, still holding the space where his knife had been. Takeshi looked at the boy and tried to speak, but no words came. What could he say? Thank you for saving us after I nearly destroyed us. Thank you for having the courage I lacked to think beyond my own pride. Kenji met his eyes and nodded once. Then he turned and walked back to where his mother stood waiting, her arms opening to gather him close. They carried Takeshi to the They cleaned his wounds and wrapped them in cloth soaked in herbs. They gave him water and rice, and the kind of care that comes from gratitude and guilt mixed together. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his dreams filled with the faces of the samurai he had killed, the families he had saved, the ones he had not. When he finally woke fully, it was dawn. Pale light filtered through the window. His body was pain-made flesh. But he was alive. He stood slowly, using the wall for support, and walked outside. The village was already working, repairing what had been damaged in preparation for battle, filling in trenches, putting away weapons that were never meant to be weapons. Life continuing because life always continues when death allows its space. Hideo approached him. The innkeeper's face was drawn but calm. You should leave, he said. Not because we want you gone, but because Lord Matsudra's mercy has limits. If you remain, he may change his mind. Takeshi nodded. He had already planned to leave. He had been planning to leave since before any of this began. That had always been his mistake. Thinking he could simply pass through without consequence. Thinking his choices only affected him. Thinking that refusing to bend meant freedom rather than a different kind of imprisonment. I am sorry, he said. Hideo shook his head. Do not apologize to me. Apologize to yourself. You fought for us. You bled for us. But you did so because of a choice you made without thinking about anyone beyond yourself. That is not honor. That is selfishness dressed in principle. We survived not because of your sword, but despite your pride. Remember that when you make your next choice. Takeshi walked through the village one last time. The families that remained watched him pass. Some nodded, some looked away. No one spoke. He stopped where the 10 samurai had fallen. The bodies were gone now, taken by Matsudra's men. But the blood remained in the soil. Dark stains that rain would eventually wash away. 10 men dead because he refused an order. 10 families saved because he fought well. A village spared because a boy had more courage than a trained warrior. The mathematics of survival written in violence and mercy and accident. He continued walking until he reached the forest path that led north. He stopped and looked back one last time. Kenji stood at the village entrance, watching him. The boy raised his hand in something that was not quite a wave. Takeshi returned the gesture. Then he turned and walked into the trees. The path climbed steadily. His wounds opened and bled again, but he did not stop. He needed distance. Needed to put miles between himself and the choice that had nearly destroyed everything. But even as he walked, he knew distance would not help. The faces would follow him. The weight would remain. He had believed that refusing a daimyo meant standing on principle, that saying no to power was courage. But Hideo was right. It was not courage, it was pride. And pride paid for with other people's blood is just another kind of murder. He thought about Matsudra's words that defiance costs blood, that mercy exists only at the discretion of power, that the story matters more than the truth. And he understood that this was the world he lived in, a world where individual choice was always collective punishment, where one man's pride became 50 people's terror, where a boy's courage could do what a warrior's skill could not. He walked for 3 days without stopping for more than brief rest. The wounds festered, fever set in, but still he walked because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant drowning in guilt that had no bottom. On the 4th day, he collapsed beside a stream. He drank water that tasted like copper and lay on his back staring up at clouds that moved with the indifference of everything that lives beyond human consequence. He thought he might die there. Thought perhaps that would be better. That the story could end with the Ronin who refused a daimyo and paid the price in suffering and solitude. But death did not come. His body, stubborn and stupid, continued breathing, continued healing, continued insisting on survival when surrender seemed easier. When he could walk again, he continued north, away from Matsudra's domain, away from the memory of Kenji standing with a farming knife and courage that shamed every warrior who had drawn a sword that night. He walked until the mountains rose high enough to block out the sun, until the air grew thin and cold, until he reached places where names meant nothing and the past could not follow. But even there, in caves where hermits lived and spoke to no one, the weight remained. The faces remained. The knowledge that his choice had been the wrong one remained. Not because he had refused, but because he had refused without understanding what refusal costs. Years later, stories would spread through the domain. Stories of the Ronin who killed 10 samurai to save a village. Stories of the boy who stared down a daimyo and won mercy with words. Stories of the night when Matsudra showed that power could be tempered with judgment. The stories would be told by parents to children, by travelers to innkeepers, by farmers who wanted to believe that defiance was possible and that mercy existed somewhere in the machinery of power. But Takeshi knew the truth. He knew that what happened in Mizuhara was not about courage or honor or justice. It was about a daimyo demonstrating that even mercy was a form of control, that even sparing lives was a way of showing that those lives belonged to him, that the only thing more powerful than killing everyone was choosing not to and making sure everyone knew the choice was yours alone. He lived in the mountains for the rest of his life. He never picked up a sword again. He never returned to the world of lords and samurai and choices that destroyed more than they saved. Sometimes travelers would find him and ask his name. He never answered. Sometimes they would tell him stories about a Ronin and a village and a boy. And a night when the rain stopped and blood soaked into soil, he would listen without speaking. And when they asked if he knew anything about it, he would shake his head and walk away. Because the truth was too heavy to speak. Because the story they told was better than the reality he lived. Because he understood now that the real punishment was not death. It was survival. It was carrying the weight of every choice forward into every day that followed. It was knowing that a single word can change everything, and that once spoken, no word can ever be taken back. The last time anyone saw him, he was standing at the edge of a cliff watching eagles circle below. An old man with white hair and scars that told stories he would never speak. When asked what he was doing, he said he was counting. Counting what the traveler asked. Everything, the old man replied. Every choice, every consequence. Every life that continued because of decisions made in darkness by people who believed they understood what honor meant. The traveler did not understand. The old man did not explain. He simply stood there counting while the wind carried his whispered numbers away into mountains that held on to nothing and forgot everything except stone and snow and the patient weight of time.